Hello and welcome everyone to the next installment of our podcast for Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring programs in academia. I am here today with the author of Chapter 15, Funding the Mentoring Program, by Monica Castaneda Kessel, who is our guest today. Monica is a grant writer, researcher, and consultant, and mentoring has been a lifelong interest for Monica because of its connection to early career faculty, grant development, and professional development. She has shared her skills for over 15 years with industry and academia, and a lot of her recent work has been with faculty projects that support Hispanic serving institutions, people with disabilities, LGBTQ+, in engineering, veterans, and industry internship pathways. And so I know that many of you are very excited to hear from Monica today because funding is such a critical component of implementing an impactful mentoring program. So welcome, Monica.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Tamara.
So let's jump in. And can you tell and share with us what inspired the work and research that you do, particularly in funding and within funding and mentoring?
You know, I got into grant writing and actually working in mentoring in a couple different ways. Grant writing first by teaching. Teaching is a lot of guide on your side. You know, you're not really a sage on the stage, as the old saying goes. And so there is a lot of mentoring going on when you're teaching. And actually, the first grant I wrote was for my students. They didn't have books and they didn't have computers. And I thought, well, I have an English degree. And I talked to one of my supervisors and asked if it would be okay. And they said, sure, why not? And we did get it. We, $120,000, and they were super excited. and you know, those little things sort of build capacity. And the next year, my boss came by and said, do you think you could do that again and maybe work with the other people in your group and maybe we could write for a few more? And that's what happens. There are synergies that happen, and larger communities get impacted when you're willing to take a chance and to share your skills. I think that's the beauty of mentoring. And so some of it is that you have to be brave, and some of it is that you have to be willing to share. So that's how I got into it.
Well, that's phenomenal. Thanks for sharing that. And I know as I was reading through your chapter, it came to me that in all the conversations that I've been having with our authors and in the work that I do as a consultant, that all funding is one of those sort of elusive aspects, right? If the funds aren't available, people typically work without the funds or work with whatever they have. And so I know this idea of seeking funding, that in and of itself seems to be a barrier for folks.
Absolutely. You know, that limited thinking is sort of pervasive, I think, in academia and other places. Other nonprofits even have that thinking. And I think sometimes when we first started talking about this chapter, Dave and Nora, particularly with Dave, he asked, I said, well, Dave, do you want me to talk about education funding, or do you want me to talk about, he goes, well, I want you to talk about mentoring funding. I said, but there's a lot. And he said, is there? And I said, are we talking about pizza or are we talking about a buffet? And he said, talk about the buffet. And I really think that sometimes it's how you ask the question, right? And sometimes it's what you think you're looking for. If you think I'm only looking for engineering funding about mentoring, then you're only looking for a certain kind of pizza. But if you're looking for something that's going to build capacity for you to share with a certain kind of student, you might be looking for lots of things. And there's a lot of protein and carbs that might be able to do that. And so there are a lot of buffet items that could deliver that. And so that's a part of what I wanted to share in this chapter, is there are a lot of opportunities out there, both private and public. And I have to be honest, they're not all equal, but there's money on the table. And I think it's about learning to think about how we ask that question differently.
Yeah, I love that, because I know that as somebody who has done quite a bit of work in the not-for-profit sector, there is this sort of mindset that folks have sometimes, where they think that the resources aren't there because they're not aware of them, and people are willing to work with less without even knowing how much there is out there. So this metaphor you have of the pizza and the buffet and these questions, these are really pivotal questions that can help folks understand exactly what they're looking for. Can you talk more about what are some of the things people should be asking about themselves in the program as they're trying to determine whether or not seeking additional funding is actually what they need?
Right. I think that we need to sort of reflect on our perceptions and expectations that we're bringing to our table, and I say our table because oftentimes we have a board or a department involved, and even the students themselves that are involved. And what expectations are we bringing to the table as we plan this? And what would we like to see? In engineering, we reverse engineer things, and we want to optimize, right? We want to build the very best thing we can build. And so how do we get there? Well, we take the reverse steps to get there. And I think that that's what's really exciting, is that can be done in funding. And then, how do we manage those expectations in our search strategies? We might need to ask different questions or break it into different pieces. It's okay to dream big. It's absolutely okay to dream big. You just might have to parse that dream into different pieces and fund it in different pieces.
So that's good to know. So breaking things down, let's talk about that, because in your chapter you talk about these 6 steps, and we certainly don't have to go into them in depth as we have this conversation today, but know that but to highlight for folks that there is a model for this process. Why this process?
I think that sometimes people get overwhelmed with all of the steps and the submission and the paper and what do I do first? And, the first thing to know is that it's iterative. We're going to do this over and over again. If you and I have a relationship or our organizations have a relationship, we're gonna get to know each other, and we're gonna have a process about how we're gonna do this. And I think one of the things that we need to do is identify the goals that the mentor and mentee have to begin with, so that we're not just, each of us are not casually chasing things and bringing things to the table that neither of us care about. I think that will make us more effective, right? And more efficient and thoughtful. The magic word these days is intentional, right? We want to be intentional. And intentionality is super important to mentoring. I loved the other day you talked about mutual mentoring. It's very intentional. Um, and in step 2, we talk about matching the goals between the mentoring funding organization and those goals that you come up with. It's very intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. And that reciprocity, right? And I want to talk about that because one of the things that you talk about in your chapter that I think is so critical, particularly for programs in higher ed, is the idea around sustainability and ongoing. And as you said, right, in your first experience, you wrote the grant one year, and then the next year they said, can you do it again? So you really highlight that aspect of sustainability and what is important and needed in order to continuously apply for funds. So can you share some of that with us?
Right. Sustainability is often a huge issue for a lot of programs, especially nonprofits, and particularly in academia. And a lot of times people don't want to change what they're doing. They're like, we're an award-winning X and we want to do it the same way. And the answer is that may be true, but people cannot fund that, and there are legal reasons. It's called supplanting, and the feds and accountants don't pay for you to do it again the same way. But you can use a different modality. You can do it online. You can show different need. You can show additional populations. And that's something that I did with the addition of that second year, is we added other populations and other regions of the state and other counties. And we also added other aspects to the program. And so I think that that's one of the things we tried to do as we tried to build capacity for the overall program. And I think that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to build capacity and you're trying to think of new ways to build capacity. Sustainability is really the other side of building capacity.
Now, I love that because I think that as somebody, and even myself, as as somebody who has sat on boards, who's done a lot of fund development, and as I was reading through your chapter, I thought, well, how am I at this stage learning new things that are so helpful? And I think that's such a valuable information. I mean, you provide in the chapter a lot of things that people need to consider when reapplying, but that idea of trying something new to appeal to the same funder and demonstrating growth or a need for change or expanding and developing and advancing the program is such a key. Like, how did I not know that? It seems so obvious, but we don't know, right?
Right. And I think the other thing is we're human. We forget that our programs are dynamic, we are dynamic, and so that's why it gets us into that discussion about assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment. How often are you checking to see what changes are happening in your program? And can you articulate that? Because that what informs your need in that iterative fashion, and can help you articulate sustainable pieces.
So can you talk about a little more about summative and formative evaluation and how they fit in to funding?
Sure. So formative evaluation is something that you do, and there are other great chapters in this handbook that do an excellent job of laying this out, but briefly, formative evaluation will take measurements, sort of a snapshot, and think of it as you might take an annual evaluation on a 3-year project, or a quarterly evaluation on quarterly measurement. think of it like weighing yourself every quarter, and seeing, ooh, it's not looking so good. I better take corrective action and not eat so many potato chips. A summative evaluation is getting to the end of the year, to the end of the 3 years, and weighing yourself and saying, oh, I either lost weight or I didn't lose weight. But formative is really great for boards and for principal investigators to make that corrective action, right? Or to expand or to inform design. It's a really nice thing. But you have to be on top of it to do the work. But what's great is that as you do your reports, you can have information to feed those reports, and you give information to the program officers, and they're like, oh, I can trust this person. They didn't just pull this out at the end and decide they've lost 10 pounds. I've seen all along that they've been working at this, right?
Yeah, and I like that because one, you're right? We've got lots of folks who are speaking to evaluation actually throughout the book. I think which really underscores how important it is to evaluate and assess throughout a program, but particularly in funding, being able to track along the way sure does make it easier when you get to the end. To have that summative and how important that reporting out is.
Right, and it will help you be more credible as you make your case for sustainability, and reapply. Or even if you don't reapply and you go to another funder, you say, hey, we learned this from our previous funding, and now we know we have this need. I think it's really important to have those little snapshots.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So as we are thinking about funding and what is going to have an impact, can you share with us your experiences with mentoring programs and really the difference that funding has made?
There are so many different kinds of mentoring that go on. I have seen full-scale mentoring. When I was a project manager for a healthcare grant, and I got to see 5 high schools or 5 hospitals and 7 high schools work together. And they literally created a career ladder for students. It was amazing, and truly, they required the CNAs to be mentored by some of the more experienced students, and I think that kind of relationship helps. But here, even in engineering, it is stunning, the transformation that you see as students enter and begin to work with their professional advisor as they get those graduate research fellowships, and all of a sudden they're publishing at conferences, they are patenting. I mean, who are you going to hire? Are you going to hire the student who comes out with 2 or 3 publications and a patent, or the person who thinks that the degree is just fine? It really shows a level of competency and interest in the field, right?
That's phenomenal. So if I'm a program coordinator and I'm thinking about where I can pursue resources or pursue funding to supplement or to build my program, what is a must-have?
So I really think that when I did the rapid review, I think that you must subscribe to grants.gov, which is free, right? But I don't think that it hurts to subscribe to any of these other paid services. And a lot of companies do, right? Nonprofits do. They're not that expensive, and with one grant, they pay for themselves, essentially. Many of them are nationally endorsed, and I happen to choose Grants Forward, mainly because they give you a free 30-day trial, and they're not that expensive. They're very accessible. But there are lots of other ones out there. And I think that it depends on the kind of money you're chasing, right? If you're chasing $55 million, that's a certain level, right? If you're chasing $50,000, maybe not so much. It depends on the kind of money you're looking for, where you want to subscribe. You're not probably going to find what you're looking for on grants.gov with the $55 million, or not $55 million, the $50,000, right?
Good. So really making sure you have access to what grants are available really is the must have. So what's a nice to have? Maybe I might not be able to have it, but if I could, what is a nice to have?
I think it's nice to have someone who will read your work. And it needs to be somebody not in your organization necessarily, or not familiar with your organization, and a lay person, because when you're applying, you often have to explain it to people who know nothing about your organization, and it's a different level of communication, right? You have to be clear and concise and not assume a whole bunch of information, a whole bunch of context. And so it's helpful. They always say, give it to your grandma. Give it to your grandma, or give it to your best friend that has no idea.
Yeah.
It really can be very helpful. The engineers have me, and sometimes they love me, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, but that's such great advice, right? Because that's what it is. You're trying to explain to someone who may not be an expert in that field, what you're trying to do. So yeah, that's really great. So when it comes to funding, what can folks live without? What might be things that people are concerned about that ultimately they could live without when it comes to seeking funding?
I don't know what it was, probably 15 years ago, they were worried about fancy covers and bindings and things like that. You're not allowed to do that in most grants anymore. High-end graphic art. We do graphic art, but oftentimes that's not what wins the proposal, right? I really think that you really want to express the need clearly and make sure your budget's correct. You follow the directions and respond to the solicitation. A lot of people, one of the number one problems in solicitation response is just not completing all of the pieces.
Yeah, that's great. It's the basics, right? Sticking to the basics. Don't worry about the fancy stuff or making it look, glossy and all of that, but really making sure you're responding to the application and providing a compelling case, right?
Right. That whole compelling case is huge. I think knowing your need, your problem statement, that's what a lot of people call it, is huge, but having the data to back it up is even bigger. And being able to articulate what you're going to do about it, and having outcomes. People often don't like to deal with the SMART goals and SMART objectives, but truly they really save people, because if people are on the fence, at least they can say, well, there's something measurable in there, and they've got a timeline. And I do think that SMART objectives help people.
That's great. Well, I'm excited for folks to read this chapter. I think funding is something that for many folks can feel, as I said, sort of elusive. For you, before we leave today, what is it you really want folks to take away from your chapter?
You know, I really hope that people get excited by how much is out there. The whole purpose of doing the rapid review was not just a study in numbers. It was more look at how much nonprofits, how much public and private are really, they believe in mentoring, but they're also trying to support good programming with mentoring. And most people just don't know that it's out there. And it's out there for things they'd really love to do, like travel and dissertations and things like that.
That's fantastic, Monica. Thank you. I want to encourage folks to read the chapter, because Monica's rapid review does really kind of blow the lid off on how much money is out there for mentoring, and to the point that you just made, for so many different aspects of a mentoring program, resources are available. And I know when I finished the chapter, I got excited right away about thinking about funding and finding funding and different aspects to use funding for. So thank you so much for using your expertise in grant writing and funding and your passion for mentoring to make all of us more aware of the bounty of resources that are out there, and encouraging us all to pursue the buffet of resources. And I hope that you all enjoyed our conversation and enjoy the chapter. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.